changing up the intro today to demonstrate to y'all that I'm not just a little XDefiant gremlin that hides in his room all day. Contrary to popular belief, I do engage in physical activity. Look at me go, walking outside, soaking up vitamin D, even touching some grass. Oh, look at that. I haven't touched grass in so long I was spooked. Jokes aside, the inspiration for this video indirectly comes from my boy Zach, that you have seen and heard from multiple weapon tier list videos that I've released. As a quick aside, shout out to Zach. For those who don't know, this man has been one of my closest friends since sophomore year of high school, I believe, so that's honestly about 11 years strong and still going. Friendships like that are becoming more and more of a rarity these days, so shout out to you, man. I love you. But to dial us back into today's topic, I had brought up in a conversation with Zach the upcoming nerf that Mark Rubin teased on Twitter. I'll put it up in post so y'all can read what I'm referencing to if you're less informed on the details. To my surprise, Zach's response when I asked his opinion was along the lines of he didn't think phantoms are a big deal and didn't understand why the developers are nerfing them so hard. I was a little flabbergasted and I wanted to check this man's IQ and chromosome count, but after a few days, I was still thinking about it and realized Zach and I have very different backgrounds when it comes to gaming. I have played a bunch of competitive hero, legend, faction, whatever you want to call it, team-based games like League of Legends and Overwatch, so the issues that phantoms have presented since day one were obvious to me. Zach, on the other hand, only really played old-school Call of Duty games, single-player games, and sports games, so the issues phantoms presented were probably non-apparent to Zach, and this got me thinking, I wonder how many players have similar gaming backgrounds to him and are ignorant, not in an assaulting way, but just have a lack of knowledge of the issues that phantoms have presented and why they are a balancing nightmare. This leads us to the breakdown of this video. I'll be presenting two separate parts. First, the balancing issues regarding phantoms, and second, the implications this nerf has on phantoms and how they're going to be balanced going forward. XDefiant isn't the only game that has hero elements, having different characters designed to fill different roles on a team. Tanks in virtually every game are designed to have some distinct advantages and strengths to help fill a vital role in a team, and these strengths typically are increased health pool, crowd control or ability to disrupt the enemy team, and the ability to protect and or create space for teammates. Phantoms are able to fill this role for their team. They currently have an increased HP pool, which helps them soak up more damage, and with the mag variability, this helps to disrupt a gunfight and protect your teammates, or help your team rotate through a choke point safely. However, in other games, tanks often have drawbacks to these advantages to prevent them from being overpowered and promote team diversity. These drawbacks typically come in the forms of having larger hurt boxes, having lower mobility and or less mobility options than other classes, and less DPS output than other classes. Let's break down these points one by one to see how phantoms do not adhere to this logic at all. Hurt boxes. I don't want to say beyond a shadow of a doubt that every character in this game has the exact same hurt box size, but they are all extremely similar in size at the very least. This means phantoms can absorb more damage than any other faction in the game, and are just as hard to track and hit as any other faction in the game. Mobility. Phantoms currently have the same mobility statistics and have access to all the same movement techniques as every other faction in the game. Mobility numbers are currently not tied to or are impacted by faction selection, only your weapon choice and attachments equipped. This means that the tank of the game, being phantoms, have the same hurt box, the same mobility, and have access to all the same movement tech that all other factions in the game currently do. DPS output. In other games, to compensate for an increased health pool, ability to disrupt and control enemies and protect teammates, tanks traditionally have much lower damage output than other classes. In XDefiant, phantoms have access to all the same weapons and attachments as other factions. This means as a phantom, if you get into a gunfight with another player not using the phantom faction, assuming no user error, similar skill levels, and weapon loadouts, you as the phantom will mathematically always win the engagement. Of course, that's not how it always works, because the game isn't played on paper, but you can see now why in Season 1, ranked mode was almost always degenerated into 4v4 Phantom Simulator. Because rank play equalizes skill levels as much as possible, and everyone uses meta loadouts, why would you ever put yourself at a mathematical disadvantage by picking any faction besides Phantoms? To tie all three of these points together, this means that Phantoms, despite having more health than any other faction in the game, are just as hard to hit as any other faction, have access to the same mobility and mobility tech as other factions, and can deal out the same amount of damage per second as any other faction in the game. When broken down like this, it's not hard to see why Phantoms are OP and a balancing nightmare, is it? Now to address the nerf and the potential implications it has on the Phantom faction moving forward. A reduction in HP from 120 to 115 shouldn't make a huge difference. As Mark Rubin himself said, this shouldn't impact ARs that much, but should make a substantial difference in SMG performance against Phantoms. This sounds great, in theory, but like the good little YouTube frog that I am, I crunched all the numbers for you for automatic weapons, looking at their base damage in their optimal range, medium range, and long range, and comparing the shots needed to kill post-nerf to pre-nerf. Of note, I only looked at automatic weapons, as marksman rifles and sniper rifles will largely not be impacted by this Phantom nerf, but shotguns could be slightly aided, as now they need 5 less damage to kill, which could require less pellets to hit, so shotguns may become slightly more consistent against Phantoms. What we see when looking at the shots needed to kill in these graphics for automatic weapons is that this change hardly moved the needle at all. Only a few weapons will perform better against Phantoms within their optimal range, those weapons being the LVOAC, the M249, and the RPK, all requiring 1 fewer shot to kill moving forward. We see a few niche cases of weapons performing better in their medium and long ranges, which will help with some consistency, but if you are taking gunfights outside of your weapon's strengths, you're already at a huge disadvantage. And when we look at the SMGs in particular, which was the big focus of this nerf, the only SMG that sees any improvement at all is the P90 in its medium range. This is why I say introducing a tank class or faction in a game where they have access to the same damage output as any other faction is going to be a balancing nightmare. I don't know what the right answer is going forward, but I just demonstrated that this HP nerf is not substantial enough to move the needle in any meaningful way, especially regarding SMGs. But of course, there was more addressed than just base HP values in this nerf. HP regen delay, or how long you have to wait before you begin recovering HP after taking damage, is being increased from 4 seconds to 5 seconds. This does help a little bit, as you now have a trade-off for having a higher base HP value, where you need to be more careful between firefights, which can make Phantom players slow down their aggression at least a little bit. But I still don't think this is going to move the needle all that much. The last point addressed in this proposed nerf is a reduction in base move speed value by 5%. Now, this is a good and meaningful change that makes sense for a tankier character. Being 5% slower, it's going to take longer to navigate the map to reposition and to weave in and out of firefights. The current meta in XDefiant is using move speed and movement techs such as slide canceling, jumping, bunny hopping, and crouch spam to manipulate your player model, making you harder to track and hit during a firefight. Being 5% slower, you are going to be effectively 5% easier to track and hit during a firefight. This, in theory, could promote Phantoms to play as a little bit more of a traditional tank role, being a frontliner, holding down objectives or choke points, and helping to protect and create space for your team. But only time will tell once we as the community get our hands on these changes and see how it feels in practice. But now, I'd like to advocate for Phantoms just for a second. Even though I strongly believe they do need a nerf, I don't want to see them get buried, become useless, and never picked. If this movement nerf and health regen delay are substantial enough, I believe then that the mag barrier ability and rise shield ability need buffs and reworking. If Phantoms wind up being very slow and it's harder for them to navigate firefights effectively, then they need to be able to hold ground and protect teammates, so seeing some buffs to the mag barrier in either its cooldown being reduced and or health increase values could become necessary. Additionally, I believe the Ride Shield ability will need a complete rework. It's already a very weak ability that people only really use to mess around with or unlock the last character via challenges, but if Phantoms become 5% slower, then this ability will become 100% useless. You aren't creating space for your teammates or protecting them, you can get shot from the sides and back, and now you won't even be able to catch up to enemies to bash them with the shield. I believe the best rework for this ability to make it viable would be to make it operate like the deployable barricade cover in Call of Duty. As a trade-off for not protecting teammates, allow Phantoms to have access to a durable source of cover that they can deploy anywhere to help them hold down objectives and chokehold. In addition, you can even allow Phantoms to pick it up and redeploy it if it's not destroyed. Let's say, for example, the cover has 1000 base HP. If you pick it up with 500 HP left, it begins regenerating health right away to be used again sooner, as opposed to if you allow it to be destroyed before picking up, which you would then have to wait a longer period of time for it to heal back to its full value before using it again. This gives Phantoms a cool resource management gimmick with this ability, and having it operate in this style makes the ability infinitely more useful than it was before, and eliminates ability redundancy, as the GSK also have a Ride Shield ability. Obviously, I just threw a lot out at y'all, so I'm going to start yapping for now at least. Let me know in the comments what you think of the proposed Phantom nerf, and my breakdown analysis of it. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the channel, and sharing the content around. That's really all I had to say. As always, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. See you around.